Okay. Now, as we mentioned, about 8,000 years ago, they start to mass production and exporting of salt to the other countries. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the lecture, it was always an important material, natural product, compound, which is essential for living creatures, human beings, animals, even also some other plants. Excess is harmful, but they need some sodium ions. And Mesopotamians were mixing salt with mustard and adding to the food. They added to the bread, but they also added to the food because it was very, very sacred, kutsal material in Mesopotamia. Something becomes very valuable if it is rare. And of course, salt was not around, all around. It was not easy to find a source of salt, rock salt, etc. I mean, I said it's easy, but not that easy, not ordinary people. If you have a small village and there is no rock salt around you, there is no sea, then what are you going to do? You have to give something and take some salt. So it was always called sacred, kutsal. And you should not waste it. It was considered to be a sin to waste it. It was so valuable. I mean, it wasn't like us just go to the market, buy it. It was not like that. It was very sacred, kutsal material. You should be careful to use it carefully. You should not ever waste it. You should not throw it away. It was so sacred. The kings, since it's a very essential material and considered to be a sacred material, the kings always tried to keep the price of salt low in their countries, not to attract the hatred of the people. Like, for instance, they put high amount of tax to petroleum, to gas, and then everybody gets angry at the government, right? So we don't like to have many taxes, and if the prices go up, we get angry at the government. Same. Human beings are the same. Governments always wanted to increase the taxes, and they couldn't control the prices in many cases, and then they were in trouble during history, all time in history. So to keep the people quiet, they said, we'll keep the price of salt low. So they always tried to keep it low. But there are some extreme cases I will talk about later on. Now, it was used, as I mentioned before, for cooking with mustard. It was used for leather tanning, in medicines, preserving meat and fish, and also preserving the dead body of people. So when somebody died, in some cases you had to preserve the dead body for various reasons. For instance, sometimes the king's minister dies away, and the king or sultan wants his dead body to be brought back, and they should keep it in salt or in honey, as I mentioned before. Honey and salt were used to preserve the dead bodies, so they wouldn't disintegrate, they wouldn't smell bad. They should just disintegrate into pieces, and you would lose the body. But they wanted the body to come back home in good shape. Now, there's an example here, again, about King Assurbanipal. There were wars, always. There were many wars in Mesopotamia, as I mentioned, because there were city kingdoms, there were wars, and there were always enemy kings. And one of his enemy king was dead in a war. It was killed by the soldiers of Assurbanipal, and he wanted to see the dead body of that king. And also he wanted to see the dead body of the king's shield bearer, Silahtar. And he wrote a letter, because in those days you wouldn't take the dead body and bring it here in 1 day or 2 days or 3 days. It would take months to travel from the country where they had war. So it would take a couple of weeks, couple of months. Therefore you had to protect it. He says, put the body of this Nabobel Shumate put the body of this nebubat şimel. Biraz da aşağılama var orada. This nebubat, bu eşya gibi söylüyor. Put the body of this Nebubal Shumet, he is the king, Nebubal Shumet is the king, in salt with the body of his shield bearer. Hem silahlarını hem de kralın bu adamın diyor. Bu adamın demek istiyor. Bu adamın şeyini, cesedini ve onun silahlarının cesedini tuza koyun, bana getirin diyor. Also salt was used in incantation, büyülerde, incantations. There is an incantation says, may her tongue be salt. Bir beddua olarak söylüyor. Herhalde tuzdan, dili tuzlansın, işte ölsün, gebersin, ne düşünüyorsa. Another one says, you salt. Burada da tanrılara verilen kurbanların tuzlanması gerektiğini söylüyor. You salt. Without you, God, King, Lord, noble, do not enjoy the meat of sacrifices. Now, when you sacrifice an animal to God, he says, don't give the plain meat. Make sure that it's salted. God likes the meat with salt. Because people like the meat with salt, so they think that the God would also like the meat with salt. So if you serve a animal to the gods as a sacrifice, in order to make the god happier, you should put some salt on it. Or to the king also, you can send some meat of animal to the king or other lords, whatever, or mayor. You should always add salt to it so that they like it better. But of course, I have to say that now, for all of us, salted meat or salted food tastes better, right? Without salt, we say we have to add some salt to macaroni. This bread is bad, it's no salt in it. Any food you like to have with salt. Actually, as I mentioned before, that we like sugar. Also, our brain tricks us. Says this tastes good, because brain knows that without salt we will get sick, and the brain needs also sodium ions. So he tricks us that salted food it tastes better. Actually, it doesn't make any difference. But the brain wants us. We memorize that it tastes better. But actually, in reality, there is no difference. It's because we need it. Brain tells us that we need it. That's just like sugar. Because with sugar, it needs energy. With bread, it needs energy. Because when you eat bread, just in your mouth, alpha amylase divides the starch molecules into two sugar molecules. That's why if you eat bread, you like it because it tastes a little sweet. Because of your saliva containing alpha amylase, which divides the starch into two different sugars, and the brain loves the sugar. Sugar first, as I told before, I think, then carbohydrates, flour, or starch, etc. They are digested very easily. Energy goes immediately to brain. And if you cannot find salted flour or sugar with flour like a cake, then next thing would be oil or fat. So we like food with fat, oil, and sugar and carbohydrate better, like baklava or kadayif, whatever, or salted food, because brain tells us that they taste good. Because, as I said, sugar is immediately converted to energy. Flour has another step to be converted to sugar, but oil, it takes much longer for brain to gain energy from the oil. Anyway, so another use of Sumerian was glazing. Do you know what glazing of ceramics is? Glazing? In Turkish, what is it? Glazing the ceramics. You make a ceramic pot, and then to make it look beautiful like Nebuchadnezzar's wall, blue or red or yellow, you have to put glaze on it, right? Yoktu değil mi? Bir kere sordum galiba. Seramikle ilgili kimse yok galiba. So you take a piece of clay. In Ankara, our soil is rich in clay. So you purify the clay. In a laboratory, you get rid of all the sand, rocks, etc. And then You get rid of the air. You just mix it many times. You get rid of the sand. First you wash it in water. You make it like a liquid. You filter it to get rid of all the sand. And then you let it evaporate. The clay in a big barrel. You have water on the top, and the clay just settles to the bottom. You remove the water, and then you have the clay. In ceramic factories, they work like this. Also, in anybody who makes ceramic, they have to go through this process, because if you get the mud from the ground, it contains many other materials. So if you dissolve it in water, you get rid of everything which is not clay, and then you let it settle. Then you make a pottery or statue, whatever, dry it, and then you fry it. But it looks just like this brick red. If you want to have blue, red, yellow, you have to put a glaze on it. How are you going to do it? Anybody has any idea? How can we do it? We have the brick, like Nebuchadnezzar, he wants it blue. And you are the chemist. In his palace, he said, make sure that you learn how to make blue bricks. What would you suggest to your friends? So you would have the brick converted to a blue brick. As a chemist, you propose something. Anything, yes?
I mean, maybe it won't be efficient.
Sorry?
Maybe
yeah, it doesn't matter, yeah.
Copper sulfate salts are usually good.
Yeah, but if you put it alone, when water comes, it just melts and dissolves and goes away. You have to make sure that it adheres very strongly. Yeah, you can use some minerals, copper mineral or other minerals, or ochre. I mentioned about ochre, right? Red, yellow, ochre is abundant. But these are what we call pigment. Yes, in ceramics we use pigments, not dyes, because if you put it in the oven, dye decomposes. So you have to use pigment. They are mineral, they don't decompose. But you need something else to make it strongly adhering on the surface. Do you have an idea why, when you put clay into the oven, into the furnace, and bake it, it is converted into a brick or a ceramic? It becomes very strong, right? Clay is very soft, easily broken. So there is a chemical change in the crystal structure. It's converted into a brick or ceramic. What kind of chemical reaction, or what kind? There is a compound in it, which is an important material, which makes it strong. That's quartz. Quartz is the sand, actually, a form of quartz in the furnace makes that clay strong. Therefore, you have to use quartz when you make a glaze. Sometimes the ladies, you have some necklace with blue and yellow. What do they say? It's coated with, I'm not talking about the stone, but the gold, there are some colored, some writing, whatever. Ne diyorsunuz onun üzerindekine? Bir adı var Türkçe. Altın bir kolye, bilezik aldın, üzerinde mavi böyle boyalar var. Düz yağlı boya değil o. Var değil mi öyle boyalı, hala bilmiyorum, satılıyordur öyle şeyler. Ya da rozet olduğu zaman kırmızı beyaz bir boya var. Ama o boya suda çözülmüyor. Mine diye bir şey duydunuz mu? Mine. Mine. So mine is kind of glaze. So you powderize quartz and then add the pigment, mix together. Then when you put it into the furnace, quartz melts with the pigment, mixes. When it cools down, it becomes blue or red or yellow. So for the ceramics, the same. You take some clay, some quartz, because it contains some quartz. You just powderize the dry clay. It contains some quartz. Put in some pigment, make a solution, and you paint it, and then put it into your oven. Quartz turns into bright glass. So when we talk about glaze, it's glass. When you have ceramic in your kitchen, the top looks like because it is glass. Okay? But of course, quartz melts at very high temperature. So you have to add something to reduce the melting point. We'll talk about later on, okay? You cannot melt easily quartz in an oven or in a furnace. You need very high temperature. If you add another material, another compound, inorganic compound, then you easily melt it at ordinary temperatures in an oven. So they invented that also. The Syrians invented that. We'll talk about it later on. Okay. So we said that salt is used for glazing of ceramics. Now it says in the clay tablet, sand, horned alkali, uhulu, horned alkali, white wheat, pulverize and mix, lay it in a cold kiln, burn a light smokeless fire, bring it out, cool, pulverize it again, and add it to pure salt, place it in the kiln, and burn a light smokeless fire. As soon as it appears yellow, see, that's important, yellow. Yellow is the indicator of which element in analytic laboratory, qualitative analytic laboratory. Yellow flame means that material contains sodium. Right? So they knew that you have to see that yellow. Otherwise, it means that salt did not melt or burn yet. So it is called glazing. So, because it forms sodium silicate on the surface. It's yellow and bright. So yellow glass you obtain. By using salt, you obtain yellow glass. Of course, there are other additives. Salt also acts as a compound for melting point depression, because if you have two compounds with high melting point, doesn't matter. If they are mixed, their melting point is lower than both. See? Soda and quartz. Soda has very low melting point. Quartz has very high, but their mixture has melting point even lower than soda. Not only quartz, but also lower than quartz. Silgiler nerede oluyordu burada ya?
Perdenin arkasında sünger var.
Ha, buradaymış. Do you remember that graph in your physical chemistry books? Freezing point depression? This is around 2000. What's the melting point of soda? I don't remember, around 700 or something. Bakar mısınız? You remember this diagram? If you mix them in the right proportion, you can reach to the minimum melting point. So soda and quartz, you see, melting point is lower than both. Kaçmış sodanınki? 700 civarı mı?
Around 1600 Celsius degree, it says.
Soda, sodyum karbonat.
Yes, sodium carbonate.
1600 mü?
1600 hocam.
Yanlışlık var ya. 700-800 gibi hatırlıyorum. Bir başkası bakabilir.
Point 851.
Okay. Evaporation miymiş o?
Evet hocam.
851 mi?
851.
So it's even lower. So that's how they produced glass, because no one can melt or could melt quartz in Mesopotamia in those days, because they didn't have anything who would reach to that temperature, that high temperature. So they could go up to about 1,000 degrees centigrade by bellows, kürük. They have, let's say, wood is burning, or coal is burning, or whatever they burn. When you use the sand air, I mean, you are adding more oxygen to it, and then the temperature goes up. They even went up to, according to some records, about 1,000 degrees centigrade. But that's enough for quartz. It's around 1,800 or something. Depends on the glass, depends on the sun. But pure sand is, of course, quartz. But ordinary sand is not pure quartz, so it may have a little lower melting point, depending on what kind of impurity they have. But anyway, so this principle, just accidentally, they didn't know that there is freezing point depression, which is the same as saying melting point depression. Well, anyway, we'll talk about it now. Now, during the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar, 1 talent of salt was sold for 1 shekel. 1 shekel is the money, unit of money, right, from silver. And they had rock salt, and in clay tablets we see that they call it namun. You see na. Who knows? Maybe sodium Na from na. It was valuable and sacred, as I said before, kutsal material, and if you wasted it, you would be punished in the hell. And they tried not to drop even a few crystals on the ground. They were afraid to spill some salt. But when I was a child, our grandmothers used to say, if you spill salt on the ground accidentally, you will collect it with your eyelashes in the hell from a hot plate. So you will go to hell because you spilled salt, and then you will be tortured to collect the salt it will go to hell, that salt, and then you have to collect it with your eyelashes from a hot plate. It was just to scare the people not to spill, not to waste salt. Now, salt became very valuable, of course. The Chinese were exporting it, but somehow one of the Chinese emperors realized that, why don't we make money? He produces salt and sells it to her. She produces salt, sells to her, but we don't gain anything. It's so valuable. Let's tax it. So in 2200, Chinese emperor named Yu, he said, from now on, in order to sell salt, you have to pay tax to the government. Now, in Roman Empire times, it was very valuable. Later on, it was taxed in Roman Empire too, but they paid the salaries. It was so valuable of soldiers with blocks of salt. So sometimes they were short in gold or silver. They couldn't pay gold money or silver money to the soldiers. They said, okay, let's give them salt. They can sell it and earn the same amount of money. So if you are getting paid, let's say, $100 worth of gold, they said, okay, I'll give you $100 worth of salt. Go ahead and sell it or take it home. So that's why, I guess I mentioned, salary, maash. The word comes from salary. Salary in Italian, it's salt. Salary is salt. So when they paid their salaries with salt, and then that word is used all over the world as maash or salary. Now, of course, we don't have any written document about Chinese exporting salt in 6000 BC, because there was no writing in 6000 BC, right? But the first writing material we see was found in Egypt around 2800 BC, soon after, a few hundred years after the discovery of alphabet. And it was so valuable, they were exporting, making a lot of money, but also it was very valuable, like other parts of the world. In Egypt, it was also very valuable and sacred material. So when somebody died in the family, they put some salt into the grave of that person because they believed that after that, their body, not physical body, but mental body, would go to the second world. They call, and in Turkey we say diğer dünya. So they call second world, and then he would continue his life just like he did on earth. So if he's a king, he will be king in the other world. If he's a worker, construction worker, he will be a construction worker in the other worlds. But to protect your status, you have to be careful, you have to pray God. Otherwise, you will not be able to go to the second world with a boat. Egyptians believe that a boat will take you to the second world. Somehow, there was when somebody died, during the time of Alexander the Great, same belief was in Greece also, ancient Greece. When a Greek person dies, they put a piece of gold onto both eyes. That's why when that person wants to go to the other world, he needs a coin, gold coin. He will take it out and give it to the man who is running the boat, which goes to the other world. If you didn't give him the money, he says, no, you cannot come to the other world. You will stay in the hell or whatever. So to go to other world, live like you did in the world, you have to pay some gold to the man who was owning the boat to take you to the other world. So you needed salt. They thought that when you die, you still need salt in the other world. But the boat was the trick. You will go with the boat. There are many drawings about that boat taking the dead person to the other world. We said that there are some clay tablets which says that if you sacrifice animal, you have to add salt to the meat. If you sacrifice it to the gods. So we see that in Torah, same thing appears there. In Torah it says, they suggest that add salt to the meat of animals sacrificed to the god. It's in Torah. Allah'a bir şey kurban kesecekseniz onun etine mutlaka tuz koyun. Tanrı tek Tanrı da olsa, o zaman tabii çok Tanrılı zamanında, tek Tanrı döneminde de Tanrı'yı mutlu etmek istiyorsanız etle oraya bir tuz ekleyin diyor. Tabii buradaki anlam fiziksel olarak değildir mutlaka ama gene de bir şekilde o kurban bir yerlere gidiyor. Tabii Tanrı onu yemiyor ama bir şekilde hayvanlar yiyor, ne oluyorsa olsun. En azından kim yerse yesin tuzlu olsun diye herhalde. Okay. So when we look at the Bible, salt is mentioned 30 times in the Bible. So it's so important that even in religious books we see the mentioning of salt. Now, as I said before, if you spill accidentally some salt to the ground, it's a sin. And in many countries, you have to do something if you spilled it. Böyle omuzundan aşağı anneanneniz tuz atar mı sizin yere tuz dökünce? Şu arka hiç öyle biri var mı ailede? Var değil mi? Senin var mı? Yok mu? Hiç görmediniz mi? Bir anneanne, babaanne, yaşlı bir kadın tuzu böyle atar mutfakta yere döktüğü için. So this was habit all over the world. That if you spilled some salt, then you would have some, you will get into problem. Bad spirits will harm you. So in order to keep the bad spirits away, because it was sin to drop to the ground, the salt to the ground, so you spilled some salt above your shoulder to the back to keep the bad spirits away. Now, today we see that in old people, but also in Japan, the sumo wrestlers, when before they start to wrestling, they throw some salt into the arena. I'll show you the picture. In all sumo wrestling, see? The other sumo wrestler is on the other side. As soon as he comes to the arena, he throws a handful of salt onto the arena, so to keep the bad spirits away. O zaman siz annelerinize sorun. Belki onun anneannesi atıyordur arkadan böyle. Now, as I said that after Chinese, Roman Empire also, because when you become an empire or kingdom, you need money. You have to collect money from the people. Because normally you go to a war to another country. When you conquer the country, you take all their gold, silver, everything. And take some of the people as slaves. You take it back to your country. Slavery started by conquering countries. It was very normal in Mesopotamia and also in Ottoman Empire, Seljuk Empire, in all kingdoms. When you conquer the country, you take their money, everything, and then you bring some slaves. And then it's not enough. You ask that king, you say, look, if you want to stay as a king in your country, that's okay, but you will be under my control. But every year you will pay me, let's say, 10,000 coins of gold or 20,000 gold. So the king had to send you lots of gold every year. So this was an agreement. Otherwise, you would kill the king. Because normally, when you conquer the country, usually you kill the king if he doesn't obey your desires. Then you find somebody who's relative, not his son, but maybe nephew or something, and then and also in families, you see the cousins, the cousin of the king is always hoping that king to die so that he will have a chance to be the king. Therefore, in the family, there are some people who are actually enemy of the king. They are just in the palace, but they are enemy of the king. They want him dead. So some conquerors killed the king and then asked one of the nephews or cousins to be the king. Therefore, that king would be very thankful to you, the conqueror, and he did everything you wanted, because otherwise he would never become a king. Sometimes the cousins and nephews are killed, not to attack them, because kings were always afraid that their relatives would be part of a coup. Ne diyelim, çeteye da işte ihtilal yapacak bir grup. Ne diyoruz? İşte devrim değil de darbe. So always in every palace there was a coup against the king, and during Ottoman Empire also. That's why they killed all their brothers. Everybody, all men were killed. Next day he became a sultan, and then he killed all his brothers. If he didn't, after a year or so, one of the brothers would have some generals, some governors, whatever, to form a coup, a darbe. He was afraid. And it happened many times. Therefore, they killed their brothers, their nephews, their cousins, even newborn boys. But that was not only in Ottoman Empire, in many kingdoms. So when you conquer, you don't care about the family of the king. Either you kill the king and ask one of the cousins or nephews to be the king, or you just, if the king obeys you, then you say, okay, send me a certain amount of gold every year, that's okay. We'll let you to stay as a king. So during the wartime, if you have to have lots of money, because the soldiers need food, they need suits, they need shoes, they need arrows, they need spears, they need weapons. So you have to buy them. You don't have enough money in the palace, then you increase the taxes. Okay? So the first thing is to increase the taxes. So Roman Empire always increased the tax on salt during the war, and then during peacetime they reduced it back to normal prices. Now it was so important, the salt in Roman Empire, that when we talk Roman Empire, the main thing was Rome, the city Rome. They lived there. So when they say all the roads reach to Rome, bütün yollar Roma'ya çıkar orada, because the emperor lived in Rome. So for them, Rome was important. They didn't care about the other cities, our countries, but they were, receiving gold, silvers, all from all the empire. But still, they needed money, and the only source was to increase the tax on salt, and they built a special road for the transportation of salt, and they called it Via Salaria. Just like salary, same words, the road for salt, Via Salaria. And the notes of the book of Marco Polo mentions that he saw a block of, or blocks of salt on which the image of the king was printed in Tibet. It was being used as money. But actually, the archaeologists discovered that in Ethiopia, in 523 BC, they were using blocks of salt as money, but of course there was no impression on the salt blocks. But it was discovered. So these blocks were proved to be used as money around 5300 BC in Ethiopia. It was found in 1899. Now there are some wars related to salt. One of the earliest war, as far as we know in history, was a war between the Pope and the people in Perugia. There's a city in Italy, Perugia, and the kings or governors said, you will not be taxed for salt. You can buy and sell so salt, you will not pay any tax to the government. But when Pope Paul III became a pope, and he ordered that from now on the city of Perugia, other cities pay tax, but Perugia was exempt. He said, Perugia will pay also tax on salt. So they were very angry. They revolted, ayaklandılar, against the tax, and the Pope sent an army under the rule of rule of his son, and of course the citizens, they didn't have any weapons, they had no soldiers. It's a small city. They surrendered, but they did not forget the role of Pope punishing them by asking salt to be taxed. They said, from now on, we will not add any salt to our bread. And still, even today, they don't add salt. Of course, they add salt to their food, but not to the bread. They always eat unsalted bread to protest that Pope. Now, another war was in USA in the past, around 1800s. There was a city called San Elizero, and you know that part of United States were occupied by Spanish people because Spaniards and Portuguese people discovered America, right? So there were no Americans in the beginning, no Americans, Indians there. So Americans, and we say they are the people who moved from England, mostly from England, to America, to look for a new fortune, because they were prisoners, they were thieves, they were jobless, very poor people. They went to America after Spanish and Portuguese people discovered. Spanish people discovered North America, and then South America by the Portuguese people. So many South American people speak Portuguese. And in United States, America, many people speak Spanish, especially in the South, Florida. Florida was under control of Spain for many, many years. After the war, they were sent out. But anyway, so in that city, Spanish people let Mexicans, the city was occupied by maybe 90% of Mexicans. They said, you can excavate salt. You can produce salt, you can sell it, or you can use it. So excavation or producing salt was always an important issue. You had to pay tax, and sometimes some people are banned. So they said Mexicans cannot, a new government said, I am the American governor. Governor, you cannot, as a Mexican person, you cannot produce salt. I will arrest you. It's against the law. And then the governor gave the right to an American citizen, a businessman, to excavate gold, gold, not salt. So there was a big problem between the businessman and the citizens of the San Alizaro city. That businessman went to a judge and said, this man, I caught him as illegally digging salt, and the man was arrested. The Mexican man who produced salt was arrested. And the businessman also was angry at a judge because he was supporting the Mexicans. He killed the judge. Of course, the rebels took control of the city, and Texas governor sent the Rangers. Hani Texas'da vardı ya, Ranger hala var mı bilmiyorum. Texas Tomix kitapları var mı hala? Yok öyle bir şey. O zaman hep Texas Rangerleri diye geçerdi. İşte kahramanlar Texas Rangerleri. Okay. And they captured the Rangers because there were not a big army. Some Rangers, and the governor thought that few Rangers would scare the Mexicans, but they kidnapped the Rangers. But then, of course, the governor sent hundreds and thousands of Rangers, and then they suppressed the rebellion of the Mexican citizens. So it was a war in states. A small war, but it was a war. Do you know the story of Mahatma Gandhi? You know Gandhi, right? Mahatma Gandhi. Have you seen his pictures? Or do you know anything about him, Gandhi? Hiç duymadınız mı Gandhi diye birisini? Hani biraz Kılıçdaroğlu'na benziyor. Gandhi filan derlerdi ya bir ara. He was an important hero in India. He is a very respected person. One of his relatives later became Indira Gandhi, was the prime minister, lady prime minister of India. So Mahatma Gandhi was the most respected hero in India because he helped to gain independence for India. Entire India was under the control of Britain, sömürgeydi. So they wanted to have independence. Britain said no independence. Britain is a small country, India, just think about 1.3 billion people. And Britain is a very small country, but they were under the control of there. Well, anyway, now Gandhi decided to publicize the desire of independence, which the people applied to Britain in 1930. They said, we want independence. They said no. Then he said, okay, I'll protest it. So the British also banned or prevented Indian people to produce salt. There are about 1 billion people. He says, I will sell you the salt. You cannot produce salt. It's illegal. So he banned. So he said, okay, I will protest the ban of salt. So he started a march to seaside. They were obtaining salt from the seaside, very salty sea. And it was about 390 kilometers from his hometown. But as he walked, people joined his march. About 100,000 people joined him, and they reached to the sea around April the 6th. And then he decided to produce, his idea was to produce illegally the salt. So when they reached the seaside, he took some mud and then boiled it in seawater and crystallized it, and he obtained a handful of salt. And immediately Britain arrested him, and they arrested about 80,000 people who marched with him because they also produced salt illegally. But of course, entire world protested that. Then they released Gandhi, and then they invited him to London for a discussion for peace. And then they also had to release the 80,000 people after about a year. But this protest helped Indians to gain support from all over the world. Therefore, after 16 years in 1947, they gained independence. So this is a photograph of Mahatma Gandhi grabbing a handful of mud to produce some salt by the sea. Birkaç dakikamız kalmış. Soda, we talk about soda. They used soda, which is sodium carbonate, as you know, it's different than sodium bicarbonate. Sodium bicarbonate, your mother uses at home they call cooking soda. But the other one is washing soda. Sumerian used it also for washing, making soap, for medicines, etc. But Syrians discovered how to make soda around 1800 BC. It's serendipitously discovered, tesadüfen, serendipitously. Many inventions, many discoveries were made serendipitously. Gerçekten bir sürü şey tesadüftür, bir sürü buluş yani. Öyle büyük kimyacılar gideyim ben şunu yapayım, o da olmuştur ama pek çoğu kazara, tesadüfen olmuştur. And when they were burning wood or charcoal by the sea on the sand, they noticed that in the bottom of the fire, after a couple of months or a year maybe, they discovered some glass, accidentally produced gas. Because when you have ash, wood ash, it contains sodium carbonate, potassium carbonate, but mostly sodium carbonate. And the temperature of the fire is sufficient enough to melt the mixture. So they were lucky to produce glass accidentally, and then they tried to find the way how it happened, and they immediately discovered that if you mix quartz powderized with soda, with ash, it melts and becomes glass. So they produced glass and kept the secret for many years. They didn't teach anybody. So they were exporting, and they were very rich by exporting the glass. So they exported the glass to many countries, even to Anatolia. As I mentioned before, the charcoal, when you use bellow, you can go up to 1000 or 1100 degrees centigrade. And even though they invented or discovered how to produce glass in 1800 BC, the only and first written document about the secrets of making glass was written in 650 BC. And we found it again in Assurbanipal's library. If he didn't have his library, we wouldn't find anything. We would know nothing about Sumerians, probably. Not the chemical technologies, of course. Now, we have soda glass, we have Pyrex glass, we have quartz glass. So it's your homework to tell what they are and where we use them. And also, there's float glass and the ordinary window glass. So these will be your homeworks. Now, this is the glass we imported. We didn't import. Actually, there was a ship which was coming from Syria and with many other materials. It was carrying glass. And it sank accidentally near Kaş. Kaşlı olan var mı? Kaş'ı biliyorsunuzdur ama herhalde Kaş'tan olan kimse yok galiba Antalyalı. Just shore of Kaş, it sank. And then it was discovered later, much later of course. It's Uluburun, that portion of Turkey is called Uluburun. They found these glasses with many other materials. And you remember that small notebook coated with beeswax was found in the same ship. Also, replica of this is in our museum. You can see it's blue glass, and it was a very important discovery because the oldest notebook using clay wooden notebook is that one. Other ones are maybe 500 BC, 400 BC, 300 BC, but not that old in the world. So silicon is something else. Silicon you obtain again from the sand. Silicon chips. It's pure silicon, made out of pure silicon with some doping. You know what doping is, right? N doping, P doping. N is negative ions doped. P doping is positive ions doped. So then you make many electronic products like diodes, transistors you can make with these semiconductors. So you have silicon dioxide, you need silicon. So if you heat it up at very high temperature with carbon, charcoal or whatever, then carbon reacts with oxygen, becomes carbon dioxide. You are left with pure silicon, just like you produce iron. Coal and iron dioxide in the oven, it forms carbon dioxide plus molten iron metal. Same idea. But of course, in production of silicon chips, we need very, very highly pure silicon. Otherwise, you cannot produce any silicon chip. So then you have to purify it by melting and recrystallizing. So there are 3 videos here. You can watch them at home, how they produce pure, very pure silicon, and how they produce the silicon chips that we use in our phones, in our TVs, in our cars, everywhere. Okay, that's the end of the lecture today. We'll see you next week.